So, yeah, I mean, I did want to talk about Bruiser Brody's passing. I myself have had a member of my immediate family pass away rather tragically and things. Describe your memories of him. How did it go with you? Like, when did you last see him before he went to Puerto Rico, and what do you remember about that whole trip?
Well, we had talked that afternoon, that Saturday afternoon. He had called the house, and we had talked. In fact, Jeff was all excited because we had bought, they used to do treasure hunts, where you'd write a note and go around all different things, and then at the end there was a treasure. Well, Jeff had just done one of these for his dad. We'd bought something for his dad, so Jeff had written all these notes, and he was so excited. He talked to his dad. I talked to his dad. That was like in the afternoon, and we had set up to talk on Monday. This was the Saturday I'm talking about now. Mm-hmm. Well, we had an agreement that if the phone, when he was on the road and the phone rang late at night, don't pick it up, because it was in the business that there's a lot of people trying to cause trouble between you. A lot of these women would find the phone number and try to call the house and cause trouble, which was part of the territory.
Yeah.
So the phone started ringing, and I never answered, because I knew where he said, don't answer the phone, because we had talked, so we weren't expected to talk again. Finally, by midnight, I thought, I'm just going to really blast this person, whoever's calling, just because of the fact that I can't sleep. It just went on and on.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, no cell phones. We didn't have an answering, nothing. We just had a regular landline.
Yeah.
And I finally answered the phone, and it was like about midnight. Well, there was this woman on the phone. I went, oh, gosh, okay. She said, I'm Nancy, She said, there's been an accident, and I think you better get to Puerto Rico. And I went, oh, gosh. Now, I show up in Puerto Rico, I'm really going to be popular, Somebody's trying to cause trouble. But as I said, I thought, well, that little voice said, well, maybe you better check it out. Why don't you call him? I knew where he was staying. Why don't you just call, just make sure that everything's fine. And I called, and Dutch Mantell picked up the phone. Didn't tell me what had happened, didn't tell me anything. He said, it might be a good idea if you do get on a plane and come down. I went, okay. Dutch is not going to tell me a lie. Dutch was not going to cause trouble for me. I felt that he was telling the truth. So when the lady called back, when Nancy called back, she didn't really go into details. She said, if you tell me a flight number, I'll come and pick you up at the airport. That's okay. So finally, didn't have any cash. Frank did not believe in credit cards, but he had one. Somebody had given him one. And I thought, now what am I going to do? I have no money. I have no credit card. And I searched the plane. This is 12 o'clock. There was a plane leaving at 6:30 that I found the credit card, and I thought, well, they might not even let me use it. So I called my neighbor, threw Jeff in the back of the car with jammies on. I threw a bag together because for some reason my neighbor had said, well, why don't you leave Jeff here? And I said, no, if there's anything at all, and he has to be in hospital for any length of time, he's going to want to see his son. Didn't think, you know what I mean? It's like we're a package deal.
Yeah.
Got to the airport. And it just so happened that there was a gentleman there that I knew that knew Frank, that Frank did a lot of dealings with because he was in and out of the airport all the day, and I explained the situation to him. He gave me a cheaper fare, and he took the credit card. Of course, didn't know anything had happened. It was, had no idea. Got to Puerto Rico, sitting around, didn't know, who's this person? How am I going to recognize him? Jeff's playing around. He was 7 at the time, so... And here was Abby. I mean, he was literally just about running through the airport. Well, I'd known Abby. He came up to me, and he was the one that informed me that he had passed. I'm standing there in the airport, And then he phoned me, and he's running to get a plane, so it was like he told me, and then he was off, and I'm standing there. I think at that point I probably went into some sort of shock. So finally met Nancy, and of course the rest is kind of like a blur. But I kind of knew that what to do. I mean, before the press hit it, I had to make sure that his family knew. I had to make sure, I leave Jeff with her children, which now I left him with Kalita, which I know now is wrestling,
Yeah.
So I left him on a basketball court with Kalita and some of his friends and that, and, had to go, as you know, I had to go do business and everything like that, and then got back, and then they took me to a hotel. It was like, well, what do I do? And it was like he appeared and said, you know what I've always told you, you do the best for you. Don't listen to anybody. You know what to do. You know how to handle this. Because we had talked, just in passing about things. So that's exactly what I did, and I had to stay there a little longer just because of the fact that I knew I had to get all the paperwork before coming back to the States. But that the people, I always have to say that the people of Puerto Rico were very, very kind to me, and I have nothing against, because you don't judge the actions of one man on a whole country.
So, I thought it was kind of peculiar that nobody wanted to really tell you what was going on, before you went down there.
No, I guess what it was, he was still, he took so long to get to the hospital, and that by the time that I left, he passed away as I was in transit, but nobody told me exactly what the accident was.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they didn't want to say on the phone, and I guess it's very hard to tell, in situations like that.
Yeah. Was finding out exactly what happened and how it happened, was that a major issue for you, or were you just more of like, mourning and taking care of your own family and things like this?
I think what it was, you go into shock. When tragedy happens, a lot of time you just go into shock. And I had a 7-year-old to contend with, at this particular point in time. So I think you just try to keep the mind busy, because otherwise people live in the past and never get over tragedy. Well, tragedy happens to so many people, as you have even told me about your family, that if you don't let it go, you never forget, but if you don't let it go, you're going to give up on life because you're stuck in that moment. And that is not what the people that left us would want us to do.
Yeah, I'm hoping that maybe this interview can even help other people, because my coping mechanism was completely wrong. I just kind of withdrew. I didn't want to talk to anybody, and I didn't deal with it and face it for a really long time until I started asking questions and looking into it. So, how did you cope with it? What was the way that you were able to get through it?
What I did was, when I got back to the States, it was the school holidays, and the good friend who had come up to, visit in that time had 2 children. I think they were a little older than Jeff. And they asked me, what can we do? Seeing what, we have to go back to work. I said, leave me your kids. Leave me. That gives me 3 young children that I have to contend with. And I knew that would be a way to cope, because when you're looking after people, your mind has to stay busy. You can't just sit there and go into your own world. It keeps your mind active. And what I would do every night, I would write a list of things I needed to do. And even if I crossed one thing off that list, that was being successful. That was coping and going on. As long as it didn't have to be a lot of things, but one thing every night, I say, okay, I accomplished this today. And it's not easy because everybody copes in different ways. So that was kind of mine, was to keep busy, to keep the mind busy. Didn't mean I didn't, when things were quiet, go into the grief, because you have to grieve. And it took me a long time because of how it happened. The one thing was he was never hardly ever home, because a lot of times it was I went into, he's going to be coming home.
Yeah.
Because we were apart for, now when he went to Japan, as you know, he was very, very big in Japan. Sometimes he'd be gone for 6 weeks at a time.
Yeah.
So in a way, I kept thinking that maybe he would come home. You know, there's a little bit of denial because of the fact that he was gone so much. And then it gets to that point where you realize, no, not coming home. And I think the one thing, because I could never talk about this before, was, I think it was like 2007, I'm not sure, Larry Matisak, who is was a really good friend who was in St. Louis wrestling, not a wrestler, he was announcer, booker, who was a very good friend of Frank's. He asked me if I would write a book with him. You know, I read a book, Brody, the Tragedy of Wrestling's Rebel, and I had always said, no, I don't want to write a book. I don't want to do anything like that. Well, before he had asked me, I had visited Jeff, and this was just when computers were coming out, and he had said to me, he had a computer, I didn't, and he said, type in Dad's name. I typed in Bruiser Brody, and I could not believe how many things came up under his name. And when I started reading a lot of it was so untruthful. And I thought, there's two people that know the truth. Larry knows the truth about the wrestling side of the business. I know the truth about the personal side of the business. So that's why I said, I will do this with you, because this is the only way that we can get the truth out, because there was another book written, and a lot of it was so many untruths in it about his family and things like that. I said, no, we need to get the truth out. And that was the reason, that I wrote the book with Larry.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if people are interested in finding this book, how can they get it?
I think it's Amazon, and it's through digital. And sometimes, too, if they message me, I will send them a copy of the book, and I will sign it. So they can message me. Anyone that's interested, they can message me, through Facebook.
Okay, cool. And, I mean, did you ever, pursue further legal action against the man who killed him? Was this something that was taken into account afterwards?
There would have been no way, because after everything, when I was in Puerto Rico, I spent the day with the district attorney down there, and because of where it happened, there was pretty much going to be no punishment given. So there was no way, especially when you're in the States and you're talking about another country, that there was no way. I mean, as much as we would have liked to have done something, there was no way that anything could be done. I mean, people had asked and people had investigated it, for me, and it was like, this is not something that you need to do, because you don't need to give up part of your life for something that's never going to be resolved, because the mystery is no one will ever really know exactly what happened and why.
Yeah.
One of the biggest mysteries out there that people have, talked to me about.
All right, so Barbara Goodish, right here on the FightBox Podcast. I want to thank Barbara for being on the show and for being open and honest about her experiences with one of the all-time greats in professional wrestling, Bruiser Brody, or Frank Goodish, as she knew him. And I want to remind you that the book is called Brody, The Triumph and Tragedy of Wrestling's Rebel, and it is available at Amazon.com. I have so much respect for Barbara because she went through a terrible tragedy and came out on the other side okay. I think this is an inspiring story. And, death is something that can have extreme damage on the emotional and psychological health of people, especially when it's a tragic death. If it's a suicide or if it's a murder, if it's a very unexpected death, a car accident, something like this, those kinds of deaths seem to have a much worse effect on people. They seem to cut a little bit deeper. They seem to hurt a little bit more than, let's say, a quote, normal death, like when somebody just dies of old age, or they're in the hospital for a long time and it's kind of expected that they're going to die. Not that that's easy to deal with by any stretch of the imagination, but tragic deaths are very difficult to deal with. We talked about earlier in the program Dawid Mora committing suicide, and I alluded to it a few times in the interview that I have suffered a tragic death in my family. In fact, my mother committed suicide when I was 16 years old. Suicide and death is something that needs to be talked about. It's something that people, it's a taboo. It's something that's not really okay with people, it seems, to talk about. But it should be, because it's the best thing that you can do if something like this has happened, to get over it and to start feeling better about it. When it happened to me when I was 16 years old, my coping mechanisms were probably the most unproductive and unhelpful that you could imagine. I said something about it in the interview with Barbara. When it happened to me, the first thing that I did was just isolate myself. I pushed people away. I didn't want to talk about it. I just wanted to be left alone. And I thought that if I just put my head down and just march through life, that it'll eventually just go away. And it'll just, they say time heals all wounds, and that I'll eventually just get over it and I'll be okay. Well, that's not what happened. And in fact, it actually got worse, because there were some people that reached out to me and tried to help me, tried to talk to about it. I didn't care. I didn't want to talk. I was 16, 17, 18 years old, and I didn't want to talk about it. There was a stigma attached to it. And most people, though, didn't want to talk to me about it. Imagine if your friend or someone that you knew had a tragic death in their life. Would you want to go up to that person and be like, "Hey man, so how you doing today? You feel like talking about that person in your family who committed suicide?" No, you don't. You don't do that. It's weird. You don't know what the reaction of that person is going to be. Are they going to be embarrassed? Are they going to be angry at you for bringing it up? Is it going to affect your friendship somehow? It's a very uncomfortable thing to do, and so not really many people ever talk to me about it. And so it was just one of those things that went unsaid and unspoken about for years and years and years. But what happened is the pain is always there. And it's like, putting some water in a pot and putting it on the stove and heating it up. And then when you don't talk about it, it's like putting a lid on it. It doesn't extinguish the fire under the pan, which is boiling the water. It only makes the water boil more and more rapidly, but nobody can see inside of you that this is boiling more and more. So my coping mechanisms were just to isolate myself, not talk about it, and just go through life, and that really had a huge effect on me. But the good news is that if you are somebody who has been affected by a death and it is causing you a lot of emotional pain, a lot of psychological pain, there is hope. You can make it through this. It is okay. Barbara Goodish is living proof of it. The first thing that you need to do is you need to talk to somebody about it. You need to get these emotions out in the open. It's sort of like if you're having a nightmare and some guy is chasing you down the streets trying to kill you or something, or there's some monster behind you, or there's something that's scaring you. I guarantee if you turn around in your nightmare and you face that thing and you go to it face to face and you confront it, it will immediately shrink and become less and less and less frightful and scary, and will eventually disappear altogether. And that's the same thing with these situations too. You need to confront it. You need to talk about it. You need to get everything out in the open, and the problem will eventually get smaller and smaller. There are people out there who are trained to deal with these situations, grief counselors, psychologists, whoever, and there is absolutely no shame in doing that. If you're a fighter, if you're a kickboxer, if you're an MMA fighter, a boxer, and you have a physical injury in the ring, you have a broken nose, a broken hand, a cut, whatever, it's common sense that the first thing that you do is go to a doctor to get that injury addressed, right? So if you're suffering from depression, if you have had a death that is affecting you emotionally, you need to go to somebody to have that injury taken care of. And that's how you should look at it. It's an emotional or a psychological injury that needs to be treated. And the best way to do that is to just talk to somebody about it. You can go into a group. Sometimes there's support groups where other people who have been through similar situations all meet together and they talk about these things and they help each other. You can go individually to a grief counselor, or you can just talk to somebody in your family. Talk to a friend, talk to your mom, talk to your dad, talk to your cousin, talk to an aunt or an uncle or somebody about it. The second thing that really helped me is to look for answers. For me, it was before moving on, it was really important to find out why and how and when, and answer try to find as many answers as possible to those questions before I could get any closure. A third thing that you can do is read about it. There are lots of books and lots of literature out there that can help you try to, understand your situation a little bit better. One of the books that really helped me was a book called The Unique Grief of Suicide by Tom Smith. And I'll have that book listed on the website. And you can find more information about that or in the YouTube video in the description down below. The Unique Grief of Suicide by Tom Smith. It's a great book. Or you can find, I'm sure there's lots of other books out there that can help you. And maybe the fourth thing that you can do is really call yourself out on your own bullshit. It's very, very easy to explain your behavior by saying, I'm behaving this way because of that, or I'm behaving this way because of this, or I'm doing this for that reason. No, you're doing it because it hurts. It hurts to think about the death of this person. It's embarrassing to talk about it. If you have depression, you don't want to talk to anybody. You want to be left alone. But you have to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, I have a problem. And I'm going to put my foot down right now. I'm drawing a line in the sand. And from this moment forward, starting right now, I'm going to do something about it. And the best thing that you can do is just reach out to somebody and just talk about it and let them know what's going on with you. So, like I said, suicide, death, murder, especially suicide, is a very prevalent problem in our society today. In the book that I read, it said that there are about 1 million suicides every year in the world. And it is actually the second leading cause of death among teenagers in the Western world. In 90% of cases, mental illness is present, but that most of these illnesses, these mental illnesses, among them, depression is number one, and that these are treatable and curable illnesses. You do not have to live with this for the rest of your life. You can do something to fix it, but you need to start. Nobody can do it for you. You need to take action yourself. And the best thing to do is just reach out to somebody and ask if you can talk and try to deal with this. If you live in Poland, or like I do, or if you live in Eastern Europe, the chances of suicide and depression are higher. I don't know what it is, but in Eastern European countries, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Estonia, Russia, these problems are higher, and you need to be aware of that. Maybe it's the culture, maybe it's something else. I don't know what it is, but you need to be more aware of these things. So if you know somebody who is suffering from depression, if you are suffering from depression, if you know somebody who has had a tragic death in their life, or who is having problems coping with a death, any kind of death, the best thing to do is to reach out to this person, talk to them about it, ask them if they're okay, ask them if they want to talk about it. And if you are suffering from it personally, you need to try to get some help. And you need to say, today is the day when I'm not going to put up with my own BS anymore, and I'm gonna do something about it to change my life. Because you and you alone are the only one who can do that. So just to recap here, this whole episode is kind of had a running theme in it of tragic deaths. And if you've been affected by this, or you know somebody who has been affected by this, there's a few steps that I've gone by, and I'll just recap them again very quickly. Number 1, start talking about it. Number 2, try to look for some answers. Why, how, when. This was very important for me to kind of understand it a lot. You can read about it. One of the great books that I mentioned earlier, The Unique Grief of Suicide by Tom Smith. And you need to be honest with yourself. You need to recognize what's going on with you, that you do have a problem, that something is bothering you, and just reach out, because you're the only one that can do it. There's only so much that other people can do for you. But it is, at the end of the day, it's really you who need to take control of your own life. And there are answers out there, and it is possible to come out on the other side okay. And Barbara Goodish is the best example of that.